And basically, so without further explanation, I'll let Professor Karban do the talking and play the video.
Thanks. I'm going to try to keep this quite short. It's not entirely clear to me what I'm going to have to say that will be of interest to you. So hopefully by keeping this presentation short, we'll have a lot of time for you to ask questions. No matter what the audience, I get a lot of questions talking about this subject. So I've been interested in the idea that plants communicate with each other. And in order for that communication to make any sense, I think we have to start with the premise that plants are able to, that plants are not just in a vegetative state, but that in fact they are exquisitely sensitive to their environments. And to some people, I think this comes as a big surprise. I think that at least at some level, anybody who's ever had a house plant in a window or done any gardening has a pretty good intuition that plants, in fact, are quite sensitive to what's going on around them. So for instance, let's see how this is going to work. So for instance, if we consider plants such as these tobacco plants, again, anybody who's tried to grow plants knows that they're very sensitive to the light environment that they find themselves in. So plants like this tobacco plant, if it's grown with ample light, it gets nice and bushy. If it is grown in a low light environment instead, it becomes much taller, doesn't put on as many leaves, but invests much more in a stem, trying to get into a situation where it has access to more light. And this has probably been known for thousands of years, and certainly is not new to science by any means. We also know that plants are sensitive to a lot of other kinds of environmental cues. So this is a picture of a daughter plant, a parasite, that is orienting towards its host, a tomato plant. And rather than just sort of going anywhere, it does move around as essentially all plants do. But it very quickly, long before it contacts the tomato plant, it very quickly orients in the direction of the volatiles, the airborne chemicals that the tomato plant is emitting. Similarly, roots are extremely sensitive to the nutrients in the soil environment. So this shows the root profiles of two barley plants. The one on the left there was grown in soil that was uniformly rich in nutrients, and under those conditions it kind of proliferates roots uniformly. On the other hand, this plant on the right was grown in conditions where the nutrients were concentrated just in this narrow band, and sure enough, it proliferates roots where the nutrients are. And as I mentioned at the start, plants are exquisitely sensitive to the environmental cues that affect their survival and reproduction. And this includes lots of different cues. In addition, plants are attacked by lots of herbivores, including these caterpillars. And in response to these attacks, plants have evolved a bunch of different defenses. On the left there are chemical defenses, and in this case, nicotine, which is a very a very potent toxin to the vast majority of things, including ourselves, that might try to eat tobacco leaves. There are a few specialists that specialized insects that are very good at detoxifying nicotine, are in fact attracted to plants that are rich in nicotine. And on the right is a photo of a bunch of trichomes, plant hairs, that make life difficult for a lot of insect herbivores. And I think it's worth pointing out that both of these kinds of defenses, both the chemical nicotine and these plant hairs, trichomes, are inducible. And by that I mean that they become much more concentrated, much more common in response to plant attacks. So they are present at some low level all the time, but they respond to the attack of insects, or, as I will show you, I hope through the rest of the talk, these sorts of defenses are also responsive to a bunch of other reliable cues of impending attack. And so that brings me to the possibility that plants communicate. And this has been pretty controversial. And I think a lot of the controversy has less to do with the evidence and more to do with how we define words like communication. So I don't especially care to get into an argument about whether or not you are happy with the word communication. What I hope I can kind of leave you with is a sense of, well, what is the evidence that plants are paying attention to, for instance, the cues, the environment that their neighbors are experiencing. And a lot of the work that I've done involves sagebrush, and most of this work has been done at a few field stations that are on the east side of the Sierras, either near Truckee or down near Mammoth Lakes. And so almost all of what I'll tell you about is work that I've done, or my collaborators and I have done, in the field. Okay, whoops. So this is our basic experiment. And let me go through this kind of slowly. These experiments have involved pairs of plants. So two plants that are growing, two sagebrush bushes that are growing quite close to each other. And in these experiments, we have three different treatments. One treatment that we call clipped. And for this clip treatment, at the beginning of the season, we go to the branch on this plant, and then with scissors, make a lot of small incisions on the leaves of this branch. And then throughout the rest of the season, we measure how much damage an assay branch on a neighboring plant receives. So this assay bush does not get damaged at all in any of these three treatments. It's just its neighbor that gets clipped. So that's the clip treatment. The neighbor gets clipped. We follow the assay branch. The clipped and bag treatment, we do the same thing, except immediately after cutting the clip branch with scissors, we enclose it in a plastic bag and a twist tie and leave that on for 24 hours or 3 days or various periods of time. And putting the plastic bag there minimizes the opportunity for volatile chemicals to move from the branch that we've clipped to the assay branch, to the neighboring bush. Same clipping, but here the plastic bag prevents air movement. And then in the third treatment, we don't do any clipping. We have an assay branch, and we just kind of go and kind of mess with unclipped control branch just to give it some attention so that it's somewhat similar to the handling that happens for these other two branches. And what we find when we look at the level of damage to the assay branch over that growing season, so this is how much damage the assay branch receives. And what we find is that for assay branches that are close to a neighboring branch, a neighboring bush that has been clipped, they experience a reduced level of damage relative to neighbors that are near a clipped and bagged bush or a control bush. This suggests that some volatile chemical is moving between the branch that we clip and the assay branch. We have more confidence in the fact that a volatile is involved because we can do our clipping, catch those volatiles in a plastic bag, use a super syringe, a 2-liter syringe, suck up the air, move it over to a different plant, and just sort of blow that air over a neighboring bush. And that's sufficient to produce this reduction in damage. So we're pretty confident that a volatile Q is responsible for this kind of what I'd like to call communication. Okay, where do I go from here? I don't remember. All righty, so we've done a lot of these experiments, and I don't want to spend too much time talking at you. So let me just sort of run through these results kind of quickly, and this will just be sort of a subset of what we know about this communication, and I would be surprised if you don't have a lot of other questions, some of which I'll be able to answer, many of which I won't be able to answer about this communication. But one of the things that we wondered about is, well, okay, we can, do this sort of weird thing where we have scissors and we cut these branches, but is this stuff actually going on for real plants in your garden or in nature? And in this system, it seems like, yeah, it might well be going on. Sagebrush often has other sagebrush neighbors. We can measure this kind of reduction in damage, this communication, up to 60 centimeters. So we're talking a distance of roughly 2 feet. And almost all of the sagebrush bushes at our field sites have other sagebrush neighbors within 2 feet of them. So there's at least the potential that this kind of weird phenomenon could be going on quite commonly in nature. We find that young plants are both the best emitters and receivers of this information. We don't get as effective a result if we're using older plants. We also don't get nearly as much of a result if we do the treatments late in the season. So sagebrush, like a lot of plants in arid places, actually does almost all of its growing during a relatively short period of time. when there's available water and it's warm enough. And it's during that window of time when the sagebrush is really responsive to these kinds of cues, much more so than at other times during the year. In the experiments that I described, I did the cutting with scissors, and that's kind of weird. We've done similar experiments using real herbivores. This is the larva of a chrysomelid, a leaf beetle that doesn't move a whole lot and is pretty easy to work with. And we've used beetles as well as grasshoppers instead of scissors, and we get much the same kind of result. Some of the volatile cues appear to be quite general. So for instance, this is a small wild tobacco plant that's growing near a larger sagebrush. And we found that clipping the sagebrush induced changes in neighboring wild tobacco plants. And so at least some of these interactions are extremely general. Other plants that grow in a similar environment to the sagebrush, there's a lomatium, there's a lupin, valerian. We looked at several other plants, and they were not responsive to the sagebrush cues. But in any case, there seems to be at least some component of this that's quite general, that lots of plants can understand, but not all plants. And at the same time, some of the information seems to be extremely specific. So we're interested in looking at just how specific were some of these responses, and we were able to clone some of these sagebrush plants, to make cuttings of these sagebrush plants, grow them out, and move them back to the field. And when we did this, we found that this communication was more effective when the two plants were genetically identical. So that we think that a lot of the communication is between different branches of the same individual plant. And perhaps that's what is responsible for the selection for this kind of communication, and the fact that other individuals, maybe even other species, are able to eavesdrop on this kind of information might be a sort of fortuitous consequence of the plant attempting to communicate with itself, to coordinate its own systemic defenses against getting eaten. We also, in this system, we were able to grow the plants from seeds, so that we have individuals that are half siblings, that are essentially the daughters of their parents. And we compared communication between these kin in comparison to communication among strangers. And again, we found that plants were more effective at communicating with their kin than they were with communicating with strangers. One of the things that we have really wondered about is, well, what is this language? How are plants doing this? And I am really the wrong person to be asking these kinds of questions, because I don't like working in a lab. I don't have these kinds of, let's say, skills to do mechanistic work, but I have worked with several collaborators, in this case, James Bland, who's in Finland, and James has characterized the volatile emissions from clipped sagebrush. And that's what this mess is here. So each of these peaks represents a different compound that is in the emissions of damaged sagebrush. So depending upon how sophisticated the tools are that you have at your disposal, people like James are able to identify about 100 different chemicals that are emitted by sagebrush when it is damaged. So unfortunately, but whatever, there are a lot of potential. The language of this communication is potentially very complicated. And we don't have much of a handle on how this language works. But we do have, we know a few things about that. In looking at these chemical profiles that are emitted by plants, different plants at the same place, or plants in different populations, there seem to be multiple dialects that are termed chemotypes. So different plants are emitting chemicals that have different peaks, and communication is most effective between individuals that are of the same dialect, that have sort of the same chemical profiles when you look at what they're producing when they're damaged. Something that we've wondered a lot about is what are the sort of costs and benefits of this kind of communication. And the costs seem pretty obvious. If you're a plant and you are competing with your neighbors for light, you're competing with your neighbors for water, for other kinds of resources, why in the world would you sort of want to tell them that they're about to be attacked? Why give them this information? It seems as if natural selection would not favor individuals that were altruistic in this way. It would favor individuals that were not giving that information to their neighbors, to their competitors. And so we've kind of thought a lot about this. And as I say, it seems like just doing this thought experiment, this kind of communication is a little bit counterintuitive. So let's ask the opposite question. Can we measure some benefits of either emitting these cues, or at very least being very sensitive to the cues that are out there in the environment, to being a really good eavesdropper? And there is some evidence that this kind of communication can benefit plants. In most years, sagebrush produces lots of flowers and lots of seeds, but there's no recruitment of young plants. Most years, sagebrush does not reproduce. And this is not unusual. This is true of most long-lived plants. There are some years where there's quite a bit of reproduction, quite a bit of recruitment. And I've been working in this system since the mid-90s, so that's 30 years. And I think that I've experienced 4 years where that kind of look like this. I don't know how visible this slide is, but it's like a carpet of these little sagebrush seedlings. And the first of those years was 2010, and we had a lot of experiments planned in 2010, but it was the first year that we saw very much recruitment of seedlings. So we decided, okay, let's drop what we were planning to do and instead just follow what happens to these seedlings. And so we started with over 1,000 seedlings that we either damaged, clipped their neighbors, the dark bars, or left the neighbors unclipped. And what you can see is that by the end of that summer, almost all of the seedlings had died, but not all of them. So we went from over 1,000 down to relatively few. And seedlings that were near to neighbors that we had clipped were about 10 times as likely to make it through that summer until the rains came as seedlings that were near unclipped neighbors. 2011 was another recruitment year. Like, what's up with that? But who knows? That's how it works. And so we did the same thing in 2011 and got much the same result. Most of the seedlings died, but those seedlings near to clipped neighbors were far more likely to make it through that first dry season. If we look at the success of established plants, what we found was that established plants that were near to neighbors that we experimentally clipped produced more new branches than those next to control neighbors. And similarly, the number of inflorescences for branches that were near to clipped neighbors was higher than those that were near unclipped control neighbors. So I think that there are kind of 3 punchlines that I'd like to leave you with. First, if you came to this talk thinking, plants just kind of sit there, they're not very sensitive, I hope you rethink that idea. In fact, there's lots of evidence that plants are very sensitive to all kinds of things that are going on around them. Secondly, that plants respond to reliable cues, all kinds of cues, cues of light, cues of resources, cues of their risk of getting eaten. And in the case of getting eaten by insects, they respond to those cues by increasing their defenses against insects. And then finally, that plants eavesdrop on the reliable cues of their neighbors, that there's chemical information out there that they perceive and change how they grow. In general, I think that I've been really impressed with just a whole host of very sophisticated behaviors that plants show, despite the fact that we kind of think of them as not behaving a whole lot, but just sort of sitting there and growing. In fact, they are, doing lots of behaviors. So I will quit with all the graphs, and maybe we can have a discussion about this system or about these issues more generally for the second half hour. Thanks.
So is there evidence also like of the companion plants and some plants prefer even other species of plants?
Yeah. So, can everybody hear the question about companion plants? There's, I think, quite good evidence for companion plants. I guess I would phrase that a little bit differently. I would say that the evidence is quite good that plants that are grown near other companion species or other companion individuals of the same species in some cases perform better. I don't know that I would say that they prefer or that they can get themselves to those locations necessarily. But yeah, I think that the evidence for companion planting is quite strong in a lot of cases. Yeah.
Have you studied the amount of chemicals produced by a plant that's clipped in an environment where it might have more eavesdropping neighbors versus less eavesdropping neighbors? Like, does it matter how many ears there are?
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. It is difficult to characterize the chemicals that are produced by plants, but that's sort of within the realm of what sort of I can do with my collaborators who are chemists in the field. That is much easier to do than quantifying the amount of chemical that's produced. Then you've got to be controlling for how much leaf material you're bagging and the volume of the trap, and that becomes doing these, quantifying the amount of chemical is kind of beyond what my collaborators are capable of. But I like that idea a lot, that perhaps plants might sort of modulate what they are able to emit. And yeah, it's not entirely clear to me how much control the plants have over their own emission. Like, I think that what I feel very comfortable in saying is that plants are paying attention to the chemicals that are out there and responding to those chemicals when they provide reliable information. Do they have much control over what they are emitting, or are those emissions largely just the result of that plant getting damaged? And so, stuff comes out. Yes?
Yeah, aside from a plant having enough nutrition and sunlight, do you find that there are plants that are happier than other plants?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you measure that. And a lot of people have been interested in whether plants grow more if you talk to them.
I did do the quote.
Or, do they do better if you play classical music or if you play rock? And there have been like lots of reports of this in going back into the 60s. There was a well-known book, The Secret Life of Plants, that was, full of this kind of stuff. And a lot of people have attempted to repeat those claims in a kind of systematic, replicated way, and not been able to sort of find evidence that it matters, And if you think about it, these kinds of things, light and water, insects, those are really going to affect how well the plant survives and reproduces. Plants have, sort of evolved with those being the challenges. Listening to music, it's hard to imagine how that's going to make a difference, and certainly plants didn't evolve with that. Nonetheless, those kinds of ideas are definitely out there, and you are not the first person to wonder that. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the light eaters?
Yeah.
I feel like you were in that. You might have talked interview with that.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here. That's why I came, because I read that book. And
I just love that book.
there were multiple UC Davis researchers in that book.
Yeah, the author of the book, came and hung out with us up in the Sierras for a while, and she's really, I think, remarkable. Like, she turns out articles for like the Atlantic and stuff at a insane rate, and as opposed to a lot of the other kind of like popular press people, Michael excluded by all means, but a lot of those people sort of they seem not to get it. That book is like really remarkable in that she doesn't have a science background at all. She has a background in journalism. The science is really good in that book, and I've been working on this stuff for decades, and I felt like there were a ton of things in that book that I wasn't aware of. I thought that book was really good. The Light Eaters. It's like a New York Times bestseller, and yeah.
Is that the avid reader? It's that now. What's the author?
Zoe Schlanger. Yes.
So you mentioned the book, The Secret Life of Plants, which, I don't know, 30 years ago was given to me by a friend. And she said, this is astounding stuff. And it really rings true to me. And I read it and thought, a lot of this sounds like hokum.
Yeah.
And I wondered, first of all, what your opinion of that book was, and then second, what kind of effect did it have on people in your field in terms of being able to get grants? Or...
Yeah. I'm going to have to be careful here, because it would take me, like I would dive into a 20-minute rant and use up all the rest of this time. But by and large, all of the sagebrush work that I've done, I've not had grants to do. So I've kind of bootlegged on, money that I have had to do other things. The Secret Life of Plants was a big popular success, and probably some of what's in there will wind up being true. A lot of it wasn't, in the early 80s, this kind of communication between plants had a little bit of a renaissance. There were a couple of very papers in very high-profile journals, in the journal Science, that purported to show things like this, and other people either weren't able to repeat those results, or felt that those authors didn't consider alternative explanations for the patterns that they had found. And so I think that the vast majority of scientists felt that, okay, we've heard these ideas about communication, and we know they're junk. They've been debunked. I was not interested particularly in that field. I was interested in essentially plant immune responses, induced responses to plants when they get eaten. And that was also a field that was difficult to get funding for, but was a little bit less taboo, I think, than communication. And I had reviewed a paper by a very carefully done paper by really well-known researchers in Washington who had done an experiment looking at tomato plants inside of vacuum jars. And they somehow knew that they were interested in the possibility that this chemical methyl jasmonate, which we now know to be a ubiquitous plant hormone that controls lots of different plant functions. And they somehow knew that sagebrush was a mega producer of this stuff. And they were interested in seeing if this methyl jasmonate that sagebrush produces tons of relative to other plants would be a trigger for plant defenses. So they did this experiment in a vacuum jar in a lab using cut sagebrush branches and potted tomato plants. And I was one of the reviewers for this paper, and I thought, wow, this is pretty convincing. This is really careful work. But it's also like kind of weirdness. Like tomato and sagebrush never occur in nature, and you know, a vacuum jar in a lab, does this ever happen in nature? Nonetheless, I thought, well, this paper should get published, and I didn't think much of it. I was doing field work on wild tobacco on the east side of the Sierras. And I kept stepping on sagebrush, and it, has such a wonderful smell, and it was, kind of delightful to be doing this work, and not much came of those efforts, of my efforts to sort of develop the wild tobacco system, but maybe my second year or so into doing this work, I kind of thought, wait a minute, didn't I read a paper? Wait, didn't I review a paper about something like this? And so I decided to see if tomato and tobacco are closely related. And so let's see if something similar is happening for wild tobacco plants. And so that's sort of how I got sucked into this.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Have you done any studies about glutamate and how it might increase the communication?
Yeah, not at all.
Is that you have to get the increase? How much? Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah. I have avoided the sort of mechanistic side of this as best I can. And so my collaborators have been very interested in trying to sort of fractionate the chemicals and get some handle on, there are 100 of these peaks. Well, which of those are biologically active? And they've made a little bit of progress, but I've not done any of that myself, and I don't have much of a handle on the mechanisms. Yeah.
You can go. I have already asked 2 questions.
I was just wondering how did you assess, I mean, the plants have so many leaves, you know, how the damage that might have been done to make that assessment when you were sitting there?
Yeah,
Growth, or how far much you grow, how many leaves, and all of these.
Yeah, so I picked a branch that was close to, my assay branch was close to my experimental or control branch. And then on the assay branch, I looked at 100 leaves. I tried to start with a branch that had roughly 100 leaves to begin with. And then, assessing chemicals, not something I want to do or feel comfortable doing. Counting, bites out of leaves, I'm there for that. So, yeah, that's what I did.
Does a decrease in damage correlate at all with an increase in the neighbor's damage, or like more bites on the neighbor, less or more defenses in theory?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of those, so yes, more damage to the neighbor, stronger response. I forget all of the steps that you're asking about. So more damage to neighbors. Some of my collaborators, I just count leaves and how much damage they get. The people that I've worked with are able to look at kind of defenses, gene products, enzymatic activity, and those are more easily quantified. So more damage to the neighbor, more of those kinds of responses.
So could you sprinkle a little bit of MSG on the plant that isn't getting damaged, and then see if it increases damage more given a certain type of clipping? Like control the clipping damage and see if glutamate changes the...
Sure, I think you could do that. If you want to do that, I will happily, collaborate with you. Yes.
So I have a regular person question.
Yeah.
It sounds like damage is not bad. So I'm thinking about tomatoes. That's all I ever think about. And so, could you extrapolate from this that slightly damaging them is a good thing?
Ooh, slightly damaging them. I don't think it's a good thing unless they are going to get more damage later in the season. So maybe, if you if you know that you, get tomato hornworms or something like this late in the season, then maybe doing a little bit of clipping will make your plants a little bit more resistant to later season damage. I don't know, maybe. But I wouldn't, I don't think that damage in general is something that has...
My plants thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you think that plants are communicating with themselves, possibly with pheromones, one branch to another.
Yeah.
But, they have a vascular system and an electrical system. Is anybody doing work on whether or not a plant communicates internally with those?
For sure. Plants do communicate through the vascular system. These plants, and many plants, turn out to be remarkably bad at vascular communication. I think that is true of most plants that are growing in arid environments. there is a lot of interest in electrical signaling within a plant. And this is another subject that was a little bit taboo and has now, I think, received a lot of, that there's growing evidence that this kind of electrical signaling is important and is widespread within an individual plant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So a while back on a science podcast, I heard a researcher interview, and she had recorded the sound of a particular insect pest munching on a particular plant.
Yeah.
And then tried just playing a recording of munching insect, and other plants would, just from hearing the recording, not actually being attacked, would create insecticide chemicals. Has that been, and I remember the interviewing saying, "You mean plants have ears?" Has that been replicated? Or?
It has been. I think, I think the evidence for there are kind of two papers along these lines, and I think that they're pretty good science. So one is done by this woman Heidi Apple, who is an American. The other group that's doing this is in Israel. I know Heidi Apple. I know that she's a pretty careful worker, and her lab, and she works with somebody at University of Missouri, and I'm definitely inclined to think that that's real. Yeah, and kind of exciting.
So plants do have ears.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, plants respond to vibrational signals, and there's also, I think, pretty good evidence that plants can increase their defenses in some cases if insects walk on the leaves and kind of damage the trichomes, just sort of brush the trichomes before they've even taken a bite. I think, that they are responding to vibrational signals without ears. They are responding to, these volatiles without noses. They are, responding to light without eyes. And in fact, we've got sort of 2 eyes, 1 nose, 2 ears. They have the ability to do this throughout their body. In a lot of ways, they are, arguably better at sensing these kinds of cues than animals are. They are processing this information without brains. So, I mean, it's unclear how far we want to push, the analogy, but they are, very sensitive to the stuff that matters to them. Yeah.
Any other questions? Because I have one question for the audience. Is Carolyn Holmes here? Great, thank you. I'll let your supervisor.
Thank you.
Yeah. And any other questions?
Do you happen to know anything about tree
Not really, but I like to, I'm happy to extrapolate from sagebrush to the rest of the world. There are, at this point, roughly about 50 species for which there is, I think, pretty convincing evidence of some kind of communication that affects defenses against herbivores. A few of those examples involve trees. Willow trees are one that comes to mind. Most of the work has not been done with trees. Oh, yeah.
Two quick questions. One, how do you see the future of this area, and what are you excited about, what we might know soon? And second, do you see AI playing in any role in this, with going beyond language now? In animal communications, AI is able to model something that is not human language. So do you have any thoughts that you expect?
If it's not become clear already, I am not an early adopter of any of this tech stuff. I would not have been able to hook my computer up. So that I'm the worst person to ask about how AI might be useful in sorting this stuff out. My imagination does not go there. The first question, I forget what it was, but I feel like, I'm probably in a better position to say something about the first question. Can you remind me what it was?
What are you excited about? How do you see the future of this area? Next big topics.
Well, I think that in general, that we've been pretty reliant for the last almost century on sort of chemical pesticides to try to solve insect problems. And for so many reasons, not even considering the kind of horrible side effects of many of these chemicals, but they are just doomed to fail. A single chemical is almost certain to not be very long lasting. The insects reproduce really quickly and are going to be able to find a way to manage to do their thing if we use single chemicals. I think that there's been a lot of excitement, again, over the past century in using biological control agents, predators and parasites. And there are some fantastically cool stories of how these have worked out and saved the citrus industry and this kind of thing. The vast majority of these biocontrol attempts don't work. And it's very difficult to get them to work because you're having to involve, this other organism that has to be there, and it has to be interested in eating the pest, and it has to overwinter, and it has to have, other sources of nutrition when the pest isn't there. It's cool, but it's very difficult to get to work. And I think that host plant resistance, which was something that people were very interested in just breeding for more resistant plants, was something that we as a species have been doing for thousands of years. With the advent of chemical pesticides, that has largely fallen out of favor. And I guess I think that that to me offers a lot more. I'm much more optimistic about that providing solutions, and I think that understanding how plants actually defend themselves is going to give us like a really powerful tool to manage host plant resistance more effectively. And so I guess that's my more optimistic view of where this kind of stuff could potentially go.
Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Joan, should we
Yeah.
close it?
Yes. Okay. Goodbye,
Yeah.
everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.